we all need to be heard, and we want to share our stories. And then when we hear a story, we ourselves become brought into a more sympathetic kind of understanding, and we learn from it, we gain from it, it helps somebody else. Think about how important that is in a relationship. And when that doesn't happen, that's where sort of people begin to split apart, or there's a lack of just sort of harmony taking place.
So I don't know if this has been expressed to you, or maybe you're feeling this, but people are terrified of having conversations these days. I think more so than almost ever before. In part, maybe because, sure, some of us have some level of anxiety around being good at conversation, but there's something much bigger happening. There is a cultural fear that's going on around conversation these days, especially with an increasingly polarized sort of set of beliefs and values where people just don't feel like they can have a respectful, open, brave, vulnerable conversation that leaves them feeling good about themselves and other people. So I had the opportunity to sit down with Sakyong Mipham, who is the head of the Shambhala lineage derived from Tibetan Buddhism and the head of the global community built around this lineage. Also, just an incredible person, thinker, deeply wise, and also human, funny. We first had the opportunity to sit down in Boulder a number of years back and traced his journey, his sort of personal story. And we'll certainly link to that if you want to go deeper into that story in the show notes. Today, I wanted to talk to him about conversation. He has a new book out called The Lost Art of Good Conversation, a mindful way to connect with others and enrich everyday life. And he's somebody who hosts conversations globally and has spent a lot of time thinking about how do we actually open the dialogue? How do we create the safety, the space, the trust to get to a place of lightness and respect and dignity and shared understanding? So really excited to share this conversation with you. I'm Jonathan Fields, and this is Good Life Project. Did you catch any of the marathon yesterday?
I did. I watched it. It was great to see.
I'm always so inspired. Every year when I'm done with that, I know you're a long-time runner. For like 48 hours after, I'm saying to myself, I'm going to do a marathon next year.
Right.
And then we hit like 72 hours.
Right.
And it kind of fades into the distance.
Yeah, it brought back memories because I remember running there and going through all the boroughs. And then I think the main thing I noticed was just how international it is.
Yeah.
Because when I was running, it was like I was around Spanish people, speaking people, and then all of a sudden it was in a different language. So it's really, it's like a UN of athletes.
It really is. I think it reflects the city really nicely, actually.
Yeah.
It's kind of like everyone is just all the same. They're just running. They're just kind of there.
Yeah, I think it really, and it seems like more or less, I mean, people here are like get into the spirit of it, so it's good.
Oh yeah, it's huge. Yeah. I mean, all the cheers for it. It's almost like it doesn't matter. People just cheer for anyone when they're on by.
Well, just to make it, right?
Right. Yeah. It's pretty cool. So it's good to be sitting here with you. Last time we spent some time together, we were actually at your place in Boulder.
That's right.
We're in New York City today in our little studio. And so I was reflecting on New York City and sort of classic New York experiences, and Broadway came to my mind. Mm-hmm. And I was realizing that the two huge shows in New York right now are a show called Dear Evan Hansen, mm-hmm. which really is about social anxiety and mm-hmm. feelings of isolation. And on the other side is a show called Come From Away, which is this beautiful story of a town called Gander mm-hmm. in Newfoundland, mm-hmm. where during 9/11, when all airspace had to be cleared quickly, 38 international flights had to land in this tiny place. Right. And it was about how stunningly welcoming the townspeople were. And I thought it was such an interesting reflection of sort of a pain that so many people are feeling on the social anxiety and isolation side, and this hope and aspiration for mm-hmm. more openness and kindness. So I thought it was an interesting starting place for us, because I'm really curious what you see is sort of the state of what people are feeling mm-hmm. these days in the world.
Well, I mean, one thing I've noticed in just the last few years, I mean, it's pretty been 4 or 5 years, even 3 years, has been sort of this increase, certainly in people's use of technology, phones and so forth. People are more sort of engrossed in that. But also there's just a higher level of, like you're saying, anxiety. There's a high level of fear. And as I travel the world, it's pretty much global. You just come into places and there's just this sense, a little bit of more people being on edge a little bit. And also, I think just a feeling of people not knowing how things are going to be in the future. There's a little bit more of an unknown or a void, and so that's bringing a level of sort of tension. And I would say that, too, this is a generalization, but there seems to be the reaction seems to be either some kind of hopelessness or a little bit of desperation, or just, kind of like what is going to happen. And so that either seems to trigger a level of anger, people get angry, or the opposite, which is sort of depression or just some sort of sinking feeling, almost like nothing can be done. And so there it does seem to be a little more, the reactions seem to be, what's happening in the world is a little more extreme, and reactions are emotionally more extreme. At the same time, I do feel like people are asking questions that in a way that they haven't asked before, and maybe before it was more just sort of a theoretical, but now it's really people really wondering.
Yeah. What questions? What do you really see is bubbling up as big existential questions? Like, this is where I'm at.
Well, I think people are really wondering about humanity. People are wondering about who we are, what we're doing. There's global things. There's obviously the climate. There's politics, but there's also just a sense of who are we as a people. What is life really about? What is what am I doing? And I think these would have been spiritual questions before, or philosophical questions, but they were like everyday kind of questions. And I feel like people are asking those, what I would call like the big questions, which we don't always ask. But because when things come up and tragedies occur, or there's a sense of just being slightly lost, then you wonder about these kind of innate questions that we've been asking throughout the, through the years, centuries.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I completely agree. I see that coming up, but I also see at the same time a certain fear to build conversation around them, because there's this sense that we've lost the middle to a certain extent,
right,
that you're either for or you're against.
Right.
It's a very polarized.
Exactly.
I feel that in this country. I know you spend a lot of time traveling around the world. Are you feeling that as more of a universal experience, or you feel like it's more rooted here?
I think there's different sort of levels of that. I think certain cultures, communication, conversations, exchanging is very alive and well in many ways. But I do feel like here, like in North America, there is that sort of clearly over this last period of time, there has been this more sense of divisiveness, and people you're either for or against, and there's this bit of that edge, and a little bit of that the gap is just getting wider, and there is that kind of fear, and almost that's becoming normal.
Yeah, I remember when we first spoke, which was I think about 4 years ago now. One of the focuses of our conversation was the idea of bravery. Mm-hmm. And part of that was around this idea of being brave in the context of what's happening in the world these days. Yeah. Still feel that that's as relevant as ever.
I mean, I was just talking with Ani Pemachudan, and she's obviously a good friend, and we come from the same sort of spiritual tradition, and we're just talking about, our own tradition of Shambhala, and one of the things we emphasize is the notion of bravery, and this is something my father always, was sort of felt it was paramount. And I feel like more and more we're just talking about the need for it, because there's a tendency for us to step away or give up. And that as situations becoming more challenging, do you as a human being sink, or do you as a human being try to rise to that occasion and try to lean in? Bravery in a sense of non-aggression, but really a sense of being in that vulnerability, being in that moment, feeling those things, but not giving up on these human values. And I think that's what we're all challenged by, because do you just give in to the animosity,
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to frame bravery in the context of vulnerability, too. Because most people, I think, would see them as not being in the same sentence all that much, or even being opposed to each other.
Well, it's interesting when you think about bravery. I mean, I think a lot of times when you think about like heroic activity, a lot of people they're scared and they don't know what's going on, but they're alive. And in that moment, they're in that moment where they wonder, what am I going to do? And there is that moment that something arises in them and they're able to feel that. I don't think bravery in the sense of just some unbridled audacity where you just kind of rush into it, but really there's a sense of intelligence, there's a sense of just being alive, knowing what's happening. You just sort of woken out of your stupor and into what am I going to do? So vulnerability, I don't think is a weak word. I mean, I think of it as a sort of a sensibility and intelligence. You're taking it in, and that allows you to act. I mean, it's almost like you need the softness in order to do something, as opposed to it's just hard.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like it lays the seeds of openness. And also just it's owning the reality of who we are. You know, fundamentally, there is a deeply vulnerable part of all of us that we try and hide from.
Yeah.
And to see that as sort of a source fuel for bravery is, I think, really interesting.
Well, I think, we're, as human beings, we need both. We need strength just to live every day. But you also need softness to appreciate the beauty and the subtlety of life. And I feel like both are needed. And as a human being, I always think about like our bodies are very much, like we have a back and it's strong. We have the front, which is organs and our vulnerable aspects of our physicality. And you need both. In order to sit up, you need that kind of softness to breathe, but you also need a sense of strength. And I often feel like now we're being forced to be just hard. And it's hard, you can't live that way. And in a practicality, it makes you less adaptive in many ways.
No. I mean, it's interesting to think about living hard and the process of hardening, both physically, emotionally, psychologically. Because I also feel like the more we do that, the harder we get, the harder it becomes to soften. Where it's not just it makes things difficult on a day-to-day basis, but it's difficult to let that go.
Mm-hmm.
As we deepen into positions and stances and we stop showing the parts of ourselves that might allow us to engage on a different level, it becomes more deeply ingrained and programmed into who we are and harder to let that go and get back to a place of spaciousness.
I think definitely, and I also feel like when I was listening to you, I thought, hardening is very much consolidating. It's adversarial. It's taking things on. It's taking on all the burden. It's kind of hardening yourself against the world. And I think in a very kind of simple way, you just become more dualistic. It's us and the world and me and my challenges. And so then the world becomes very much just us and them. And everything becomes this very intense situation. And life is not like that. It's very fluid. It's interchangeable. And so I think the solidity or the toughening often comes from fear. It often comes from not wanting suffering or not wanting to be, in a sort of difficult situation. So there's a sense of, can my hardening keep things away? Am I going to suffer less or am I going to feel less, And you can only maintain that for so long.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, though, because part of that is the assumption that I think a lot of us probably make, that feeling is suffering.
Right.
And the best way to remove suffering is to remove feeling.
Which isn't really true. I mean, I'm a big believer in feeling.
Yeah.
And when I teach meditation, I say you have to feel first. And meditation is not of just like a disembodied experience. It's not a removing your humanity, right? You have to feel. And I feel like feeling is intelligence. It's like, if you think about it, just our senses, we're just contextualizing who we are in the universe. Like, who am I as a person? That's how you feel. You see, you smell, taste, touch. You know who you are. And I think we may not be thinking about it in an existential way, but we need to know who we are in terms of what's going on. And so feeling are like our tentacles and understanding what we're doing. And if we can feel ourselves, then we can begin to feel what other people feel. And so us not feeling is often a way of just shutting down communication with the world or, relationship.
Yeah. And I think communication with the world, communication with us, because that's sort of level one, feeling what's happening within ourselves. If you can't even do that, I wonder if you even have the capacity to then go beyond. If I block off my own inner emotions, my own inner world, how then can I turn my ability to sense what's happening in somebody else's inner world out there? And I guess the bigger context also is sort of what you were saying, which is it's all based on the assumption that I am me and you are you and we're completely separate. And I think increasingly these days in opposition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're more alike than we are different. And I think a lot of times we don't always see that. And there's a quality where there's sometimes a lot of confusion just about life, and so it's easier to try to allocate blame to somebody else or try to separate it out. It's them, it's not me kind of situation. So there's a lot of just, maybe an attempt to sort of navigate life. But the reality is that as we are human creatures, we're creatures of social creatures, and we need to communicate. We learn from what somebody is saying, and just by watching their expressions and how we, it's like others enrich our life, and we enrich their life. And so the more we actually begin to separate, we're just kind of cheapening life in many ways, and we're kind of making it more shallow. And I feel like that's, even despite all the kind of advancement materialism we have at that level, that's how we experience life. I mean, that's the beauty and then the richness of life.
Yeah. So wouldn't it be great if you could have nutritious, Instagram-worthy meals every day without having to hit the farmer's market and chop up a million fruits and veggies? Now you can get all your superfoods super fast with Daily Harvest. Daily Harvest sends superfood smoothies and breakfast bowls straight to your door in ready-to-blend or heat cups. I love having one of their mint and cacao smoothies as an afternoon pick-me-up. It's crazy yummy and super refreshing. And I also really love the convenience of being able to reach into the freezer and in a matter of seconds have an incredible smoothie or bowl without having to shop and with no wasted food. Go to daily-harvest.com and enter promo code GOODLIFE to get 3 items free in your first box. That's promo code GOODLIFE for 3 free Daily Harvest cups at daily-harvest.com. That's daily-harvest.com. Abraham Lincoln once said, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." And FreshBooks couldn't agree more. Having just launched an all-new version of their cloud accounting software for small business owners, FreshBooks believes that having the right tools is the key to working smarter, becoming more organized, and getting paid faster. The new notification center in FreshBooks is like your personal assistant. You'll always know what's changed in your business since you last logged in and what needs to be dealt with really quick. With new projects feature, you can share files, images, and messages with your clients and team and see how quickly things happen when all your conversations live in one place. And you never forget to bill for another hour using FreshBooks time tracking tool. You can automatically pull your track time into your invoice so you're always getting paid for exactly what you're worth. To claim your 30-day free trial with no credit card required, go to freshbooks.com/goodlife and enter the Good Life Project in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Why are you so focused on the idea of conversation, the art of conversation, the way of conversation these days?
Well, I think conversation, it's been an interesting kind of journey because I realized, like, as a meditation teacher and as a practitioner of meditation, you're essentially, one way to look at it is you're having a conversation with yourself, with your own mind and your feelings and thoughts. And then a lot of those issues that you are having conversation, often they're in relation to somebody else and my relationship to somebody else or the world. And so that's just the external conversation. And I think a lot of who we are is determined by our happiness, our experience of reality, our quality of life is often determined by our relationship with other people. And that often comes down to very simple conversation. And I define conversation not necessarily meaning that it has to be sort of a bargain or a negotiation, but just like simple human interaction and just sort of how we communicate. And it's almost so simple that many of us just think, oh, it's just, as we say, small talk or something, and we realize, like, actually in those moments, there's a lot going on, and to me, it's you're acknowledging another human being, and you're communicating with that, and so it's a very powerful sort of moment.
Yeah, it feels like it's almost like that is true conversation is where you allow your deeper humanity to show itself and where you allow yourself to see both somebody else's humanity and maybe even your humanity in them.
It is, and I think it's just, in a very simple way. It's not even necessarily like courtesy or decorum, but it's actually just acknowledging somebody else. It's caring about somebody else for a moment. It's letting another person into your world, into your consciousness, and you have this exchange. And there's this kind of very simple, sort of innate need for us to do that. And I feel like right now, in many ways, we're sort of in danger of losing just the ability to communicate because obviously there's a technology which can be very positive in terms of connecting us. At the same time, that humanness has to be there.
Yeah. And we've sort of talked about one of the major barriers to this, I think, which is sort of the cultural and political environment around, and sort of a fear of how do we may see the world so profoundly differently than those who we would actually be interested in having conversation with. That we avoid the conversation because we're scared that rather than being something fulfilling or nourishing or that deepens our humanity, it's just going to turn into a firestorm of pain really quickly.
There's that possibility.
Yeah.
I think there's that fear, and obviously there's like family reunions and all these kinds of things that people are
the classic dysfunctional
dysfunctional,
right?
and it's like, and then with politics, many things.
Yeah.
And so like, I remember, when I was writing a book, I said, it's important to have just simple things you can talk about, like the weather. Yeah. And just like we're both experiencing it, and there may be, we may not agree on many things, but we realize we're both standing in a rainstorm or it's the sun shining, and there's like human connectivity in that way. And I think that's really the kind of the key. And then actually, if you think about it, any relationship is based upon trust. And even if you're hearing somebody else's point of view, it's like some basic level of respect and some basic level of acknowledgement. And then from that, you can approach more challenging subjects. But if you don't have that, then going right into the hardest topic, of course, it's going to be incredibly difficult.
Yeah. No, start with the common ground. I think it's a great sort of inroad. Technology is the other thing that we kind of touched on a tiny bit, but I'm actually curious what your thoughts are more, because I know you're not allowed to. You use technology. You interact through it. You leverage it to share your ideas and your teachings and build community. And at the same time, us sitting here, in two chairs looking at each other is a very different experience than if we had, what we tried to create as a near identical conversation through technology. What are your feelings around sort of technology and the way that it interacts with conversation and our ability to actually get to the same place?
Well, I like what you said. It's near identical, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the real thing, right? So why not have the real thing? And so there's a quality of when we're living in a world where I think the whole technology is to make us feel more connected. And you can say that is certainly true. And I feel like this is not about anti-technology particularly, but it's about let's stay on top of the technology. Let's leverage the technology to build human communication interaction. A lot of the issues that we're going to be dealing with as a culture in the world is going to be solved by human interaction somehow. We have to sort of, in a very basic way, communicate and get along. And so if we begin to somehow lose that, then we really have to wonder, like, is this the best thing that's going to be happening? And as you know, I feel like there's a lot of concern among many people, many groups, that they are just sort of in danger of losing that ability to connect on that level. And I was thinking, texting and all these kind of things are in a very basic way just acknowledging somebody, just acknowledging their existence. And so we can do that at the human level. But I find that when you do that on the human level, there are many unseen benefits. The way, the warmth that's created, just good human good-heartedness. There's something about that, and that stays with you as a feeling. And for most of us, what we remember, sort of at the end of our life is those moments, and that's what we're going to remember. We're not going to remember, I want to watch one more TV show, So
yeah, I feel like you can sense people's intention on a whole different level when you're actually just face to face as well, and I feel like that matters.
It does. Yeah, I think that it's about physical presence, just among each other. And conversation doesn't always have to be with words. It's just, sharing the same space. And communicating can be in silence. And, the other aspect of it is just listening. We all need to be heard. And we want to share our stories. And then when we hear a story, we ourselves become brought into a more sympathetic kind of understanding, and we learn from that, we gain from it, that it helps somebody else. Think about how important that is in a relationship. And when that doesn't happen, that's where sort of people begin to split apart, or there's a lack of just sort of harmony taking place.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like also one of the underpinnings to allow that dynamic to unfold is a sense of shared safety. I'm curious, one, whether you agree, and two, if so, what your thoughts are on how to create that sense of safety.
Well, I think one aspect of the way I've tried to approach this, and I call it sort of the lost art of like good conversation as opposed to sort of any conversation, as it were. And I think good, not necessarily in a moralistic way, but just something whole or wholesome. I think one of the aspects of good conversation is being able to hold a space and actually have the bravery and strength. So when you're having a conversation, it actually takes strength just to be there. So holding the space so you don't feel like intimidated or kind of threatened by what's going on, but actually hold the space. And holding that space can be listening or speaking, but there's a quality of allowing for that sort of potency to occur. And then I think that holding that space in a particular way, which doesn't come through just words, but just how you are in that and how you can relate to that person, then that creates a relaxation and a safety. People feel like they can share. And a lot of times if we're having coffee or tea, or we're in a situation, there's like a physical safety that's created, and then proximity, and when we sit, and then all of a sudden we feel like we can share. And that's a very sort of human thing to do. And I feel like that's sort of what that notion of safety is, where people can open up and reveal themselves a little bit.
Yeah, no, I feel it's so important. You brought up the idea of it taking a certain amount of energy to create that.
Right.
It's interesting for me because I reflect on this often, because part of the way I earn my living is, I have the great opportunity to just spend time in conversation with amazing people like you. And I'll sometimes be surprised where, if we tape 2 conversations in one day, I'll realize that I'm kind of cooked after that. Mm-hmm. Even though I thoroughly enjoyed it and was energized by the conversation, I'll try and go and do something deeply creative afterwards. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you know what? I've actually, I think sometimes we don't realize that while it gives energy, that it really does take an investment to be open and present and deeply attuned and to hold that space.
Yeah, you're giving part of yourself. I mean, I think there's a sense of generosity in listening and, like complimenting and being magnanimous and being there is really a gift. And I feel like that's great. And I feel like that's what you feel like when somebody's listening to you or you're having a conversation. Both people show up, and and then it does take energy, and as we do, and even if it's good conversation, we we realize, oh, that took a lot of energy, but I think that's natural, and then you go for a walk or take a nap, or you know what I mean.
Sometimes both,
right? And then you feel like okay, and then also it's like absorbing. Like you need time to just absorb what happened, right? Yeah. And just like, oh, that was like I just shared somebody's life, and here it is, and that's just not fluff, there's something substantial that occurred.
I mean, that's really interesting, also because I wonder if we don't create the time first to have the conversations in the first place, but even when we do, to then create space afterwards to sort of integrate what's just happened. I feel like there was a window in our sort of history where contemplation in space was a much more accepted part of the day, part of the human experience. And these days, it's kind of being annihilated.
Well, I think it's the speed, and also it being efficient. Like I have to use every moment. And if we're not saying anything, it's a waste of time. And that's just not true. Like we know in meditation, like space is it's like the universe. There's like, even though it's empty, there's energy there, and there's something happening, and we need that time. And I think part of conversation is allowing people not to have conversation, like knowing that it's okay and you can just be there. And then when you want to exchange, you exchange, and actually having that confidence or having that openness is important. And sometimes you're sitting there and you could be having breakfast and not say anything, as opposed to you have to fill up the space. And then when there is that moment, you begin to share. I often think it's like a campfire. you create that campfire, and it takes time to build the fire, but then once it's warm, you can kind of experience it.
And I also, something that you brought up about being, I mean, you sort of shared this a couple of times in different ways now, the idea of just being with somebody physically, present, in a comfortable way, is its own conversation, even if no words are ever said.
Right.
And I think there's power in that.
I think so, and I remember, like, for myself, being with my father, and I remember being with some of the spiritual masters. Sometimes nothing was said. You're sitting there, and you didn't walk away saying nothing happened. You realize, like, it was very powerful just being in that environment. And there's a lot. I mean, I think they say it's like only 10% is really communicated through words. I mean, there's a lot else going on. And so I think for ourselves, being together in just sort of proximity and energy. So I think it's like it benefits both, and it creates a certain atmosphere.
Yeah, which again speaks to the idea of technology is great, and at the same time, being present, even if no words are uttered, just to sort of, I wonder if it also being able to have breakfast next to somebody, or just be in a room with somebody where you're reading side to side, or just doing your own thing, or that knowing that sharing the space in that way is actually, you're both at peace with that, is a really powerful transmission between you. It's sort of like saying, I trust you and you trust me.
Yeah, it's almost a non-verbal conversation. Yeah. Like we are communicating, but not using words. We both know what's happening, and we both know that it's okay. And that's also trust too. That's also a sense of like a sensitivity, and that's also vulnerability. Like we can be there, and also to be in silence is also confidence. Like you have to be, you're okay in that space. You don't feel unnerved by it or threatened by it. And so there's a sense of who you are. And I think when you reflect on situations where you could do that, you both felt a sense of health, and that allowed you to be there. And then when you're not in that situation, you feel sort of needy. You realize you're trying to fill up the space. And so it's really interesting in terms of just sort of your state of being.
Yeah. One of the things that you write about around this sort of like idea of building conversations is the idea of yes and, which is kind of funny to me because I know that in the context of improv.
Right.
So I'm like, so it crosses into Buddhism and conversation. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Tell me more about sort of how you think about this idea.
Well, I think there's sort of just watching our pattern of how we relate to people, and realize that often we can sort of put our own sort of commentary on what somebody else is going to do, or put words in their mouth and, try to finish our sentences and so forth. But it's more, rather than, yes, but kind of something, there's immediate sense of trying to shut somebody down. And I think there's a quality of trying to uplift and get, how do you actually get things moving? And it's not just being agreeable, but it's a quality of being more sort of humorous or being more cheerful in that moment.
Humor.
Yes.
It's kind of funny that when I think probably a number of years ago, I would think about the most revered teachers and spiritual masters and masters in all different fields. My idea was that these were serious people, that their lives were serious people, right. and everything was very sort of austere.
Yeah.
And the more I've met people who I feel like really they're in some way get it, whatever it may be, there seems to be a lightness
I think so,
about them. Has it been your experience as well?
It has definitely been, yeah. And I also feel like some have been very intense, but they're also very, but they have
both sides.
But they have both sides. But I also feel like there's like a fundamental sense of humor. It's almost like sort of the joke's on us kind of thing, and there's a quality of lightness, and I would almost call it the humor is more childlike. There's a quality of, there's not necessarily a punchline, but there's just a sense of just curiosity, and you're just more fluid that way. And life hasn't made you hard or one-dimensional, but it's really made you more curious. And, people laugh for different reasons, whether it's pain or something, but fundamentally it allows you to kind of come out of something and to see something. But, everyone is, has a slight smile going on.
Yeah. The smartest people I know just don't take themselves all that seriously.
Right, exactly.
They're like, here's what I know.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
Kind of.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like they hold themselves lightly, and the ideas, and like they may hold the ideas with great importance and know that there's import behind them, and at the same time there's a sense of lightness, which I think is interesting, kind of coming full circle, is getting harder for people to access these days.
Yeah. Or we have to have sort of comedy to lighten our situation up, and so, I do feel like there is this sense of taking it all on, and often when you see people in really difficult situations, it's very serious, but it's a sense of being able to take it in somewhat of a lighter way that has allowed them to survive, really, to get through it and to persevere. So I feel like that element is needed. There needs to be some release or levity to the whole situation, and also I think just giving ourselves a break and giving each other a break and allowing ourselves to do that, and as opposed to we have to be right all the time, or they have to be wrong all the time, or right all the time. So
yeah, there's a famous quote. I'm going to get it completely wrong. It's something like, "Would you rather be right or be happy?"
Right.
How do you feel about that quote? I'm curious. Assuming I've semi-bastardized it, but you get the idea.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think a lot of it is, what is life and what's important. And I think, ultimately, we're the ones living life. And we have to look at how we're experiencing it. And that itself is, to me, the notion of happiness from that point of view.
Mm. So I know I want to be super respectful of your time. We're pushing the edge of our boundaries here. There's one other concept that you offer up, and then we'll come full circle right after that, which is this notion of wind horse. Mm-hmm. Tell me what you mean by this.
Well, it comes from a Tibetan word called lungta, and lung is wind, ta is horse, and so it's roughly translated as wind horse, and it's the notion of just sort of inherent energy, and I would say magic, and there's a sense of power, and so I think it's a life force. It's there's an energy that when we have lungta, there's a sense of looking at life with a sense of purpose. I mean, you could say success, but there's a sense of energy and movement, and I feel like in conversation, it's like riding lungta. There's a sense of riding that energy, riding a horse. There's a quality of we're on something that's moving, and I think life is, about lungta. It's about how you can ride the energy and whether we can handle it. And in many ways, you can say, is life riding us, or are we riding life? And I think the notion is that, we're trying to ride life in a dignified way. And so that's a really important theme. And I feel like right now, especially, a lot of what we've been talking about, fear, you need lungta, you need the sense of wind horse and vibrancy. And that allows you to have humor, it allows you to remain in the challenge, and I feel like more and more it's a key element. And to me, it's really like tapping into some deep, primal human spirit. There's something in us that wants to be there, and there's some, kind of almost heroic aspect. There's something that us wants to sort of be present and be good and to have that strength, and it's allowing ourselves to go there.
Mm. How do we go there is the question.
Well, I think being in the moment, relating with, and a lot of the issues we've been talking about, actually you have to feel. And I think that lungta is not created, but it's almost there, and it's a matter of recognizing. I would say that's different than sort of getting your energy up, which is slightly different. But a lot of times the energy's there, but we just don't have the confidence to kind of rise to the occasion in that particular way. But staying in the moment and relating with what is happening. And I think lungta is often, just waiting for us to mount.
Mm. So, coming full circle, I asked you the same question 4 or 5 years ago. Time has passed, experience has passed, the world has changed in interesting ways. So, if I offer up this phrase, to live a good life, what comes up?
have a good conversation. I think to share the goodness. And if we can do that, then we're all leading a good life. There's a sense of how we can share in the richness that we have. And to me, more and more, as the world is becoming more kind of self-oriented, I think conversation is not just in the kind of the conventional, colloquial way, but it's a sense of, can we actually share this existence? Can we share what is happening? And the more we do that, then we have lungta. We have a sense of sort of being alive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
You too. Hey, thanks so much for listening. And thanks also to our fantastic sponsors who help make this show possible. You can check them out in the links we've included in today's show notes. And while you're at it, be sure to click on the subscribe button in your listening app so you never miss an episode, and then share the Good Life Project love with friends. Because when ideas become conversations that lead to action, that's when real change takes hold. See you next time.